Everyone keeps asking the same question lately. Are we headed toward World War III? But that question isn't coming from curiosity. It's coming from a nervous system that can feel instability. People don't ask that when life feels steady. They ask it when systems start to crack, when the ground feels less reliable, when the future feels like it's shrinking. You can feel it scrolling the news, every headline sharper than the last, every update framed like urgency, threat, or inevitability. You can feel it in conversations too. People are more defensive, more reactive, less patient, like everyone's bracing for something they can't quite name. And you can feel it in your body before you ever put words to it. Tight chest, shallow breath, jaw clenched, sleep weird, doom scrolling like it's a job. That's not you being dramatic. That's your brain doing what it evolved to do: detect threat cues and scan for patterns. Wars don't start in a vacuum. They start when uncertainty piles up, when economic pressure builds, and when leaders realize fear is easier to manage than truth. Fear changes how people think. It shortens attention spans. It keeps people reactive instead of reflective. And once fear takes over, people stop asking structural questions. They stop looking at systems. They stop noticing who holds the power and who pays the price. So instead of asking whether a global war is coming, ask the better question: why does everything feel like it's tightening all at once? And who benefits when we're too overwhelmed to see clearly? Here's the part most people miss. Global instability isn't random. It follows patterns. When economic systems begin to strain, power consolidates. When power consolidates, leaders stop fixing internal problems and start looking outward. When people begin asking structural questions, fear suddenly floods the conversation. Fear is useful. It narrows attention. It exhausts people. It keeps populations reactive instead of organized. This isn't about secret meetings or shadowy plots. It's about how power behaves under stress. When systems can't deliver stability anymore, they switch strategies. They move from consent to control. And control almost always comes wrapped in threat. When fear dominates the public narrative, complexity disappears. Nuance gets flattened. Long-term thinking collapses. People stop asking how systems work. They stop questioning incentives. They stop noticing who benefits from instability and who absorbs the damage. That's not because people are unintelligent. It's because fear rewires attention. This is how failing systems buy time. They don't solve problems, they manage perception. Fear doesn't fix broken systems, it only delays accountability. Fear simplifies the world into enemies and allies. It removes context. It rewards obedience over understanding. When people are kept afraid, they stop demanding better systems. They settle for familiar ones, even when those systems are harming them. That's how instability becomes normalized instead of challenged. What we're seeing across the world right now isn't chaos, it's pressure. Pressure around resources, pressure around trade routes, pressure around energy, labor, and supply chains. That pressure shows up as military posturing, alliance shifts, and aggressive rhetoric. Not because leaders are irrational, but because escalation becomes leverage. Leverage matters most when economic powers start slipping. Countries don't escalate because they want destruction. They escalate because dominance protects access. This is why global tension spikes during late-stage empires, not at their peak, but at their decline. As systems weaken, every move becomes a test. Every boundary gets pushed. Every response is measured for weakness. Instability isn't a failure of leadership alone. It's a signal that the system itself is under strain. When systems can no longer expand, they turn competitive. They stop cooperating and start hoarding. They treat uncertainty as a threat instead of a warning. This is how pressure hardens into conflict. Not all at once, but gradually, as options narrow and patience runs out. Pressure doesn't announce itself as danger. It shows up as urgency, as competition, as the sense that there isn't enough time, space, or room for error. When systems feel cornered, cooperation collapses, risk-taking increases, and escalation starts to feel reasonable instead of reckless. That's how structural strain gets mistaken for aggression, and how conflict begins to look inevitable instead of avoidable. On paper, alliances look clean. They're presented as moral commitments, shared values, and mutual defense. In reality, they're driven by interests. Public language focuses on freedom and security. Private decisions revolve around markets, influence, and profit. That doesn't make any single country uniquely evil. It makes them predictable. Empires don't admit decline. They deny it, project strength, and outsource damage. And when damage has to happen, it rarely lands on the people making the decisions. It lands on civilians, on workers, on communities already stretched thin. Power stays insulated while cost spreads outward. That isn't corruption in the narrow sense. It's how hierarchical systems preserve themselves. Risk is externalized, loss is socialized, and accountability dissolves behind complexity. This is why official narratives sound clean while lived reality feels brutal. The language protects power even as the consequences spill downward. This is why harm is often described as unfortunate rather than intentional. Why consequences are framed as unavoidable instead of chosen. Why suffering is treated like collateral instead of policy. When systems are built to protect power, pain becomes invisible. It gets buried in process, it gets justified by complexity, and it gets normalized over time. That's how people are asked to absorb instability quietly, and how injustice survives without ever calling itself injustice. This is where capitalism comes fully into the picture. Late-stage capitalism produces the same outcomes every time: extreme inequality, artificial scarcity, public exhaustion, social unrest. When profit slows, elites look for new engines. Historically, war has been one of them. Military contracts surge. Reconstruction follows destruction. Debt cycles reset. Wealth concentrates upward. Meanwhile, ordinary people pay with their bodies, their labor, and their lives. Conflict stabilizes profit even as it destabilizes society. That's why war is often framed as necessary, inevitable, or defensive. It has to sound moral to remain profitable. Violence is laundered through language, suffering is reframed as sacrifice, and loss is described as the price of security. This isn't about individual greed. It's about a system that rewards extraction and calls it success. When profit is prioritized over people, collapse becomes a feature, not a failure. And instability becomes something to manage, not something to prevent. War doesn't just destroy infrastructure, it restructures economies. It redirects public money upward through contracts, privatization, and debt. When destruction becomes profitable, prevention loses value. Peace stops being the goal. Stability becomes secondary to growth. That's why crises are prolonged instead of resolved, and why the people paying the cost are never the ones making the decisions. Profit grows fastest where accountability is weakest, and instability becomes a business model. If all of this feels overwhelming, that's not a personal failure. Your nervous system evolved to detect threat before your conscious mind can make sense of it. So when the world feels unstable, your body reacts first. Constant crisis messaging keeps people dysregulated. Every alert, every breaking headline, every manufactured emergency trains the brain to stay on edge. A dysregulated population doesn't organize. It scrolls, it argues with itself, it burns out. Fear shortens attention spans. It collapses long-term thinking. It makes people easier to manage. Fear doesn't just prepare populations for war, it prepares them to accept less security, less dignity, less future. When fear becomes constant, exhaustion does the rest. People stop imagining alternatives. They start settling for survival. That's how control becomes normalized without ever needing force. Exhaustion isn't accidental, it's produced. When people are overwhelmed, they don't organize together. They turn inward. They blame themselves. They blame each other. That's why fear-based systems invest so heavily in constant urgency. It keeps people reactive instead of reflective, busy instead of strategic. A tired population is easier to govern than an empowered one, and silence is easier to maintain when everyone is too exhausted to speak. When exhaustion becomes normal, resistance starts to feel impossible. People adapt to pressure instead of questioning it. That's how control settles in quietly. Here's the part that matters most. Whether or not a global war officially breaks out isn't the only question worth asking. The deeper question is this: what kind of world are we being conditioned to accept? Because systems don't change when people are exhausted. They change when people can see clearly. Stability doesn't come from domination. Safety doesn't come from hoarding power. And peace doesn't come from fear. When people are kept busy surviving, they don't have the energy to resist. They don't have time to organize. They don't have room to imagine alternatives. That isn't accidental, it's structural. When survival takes all your bandwidth, consent becomes easier to manufacture, silence becomes easier to enforce, and injustice becomes easier to normalize. This is how harmful systems persist. Without constant violence, they rely on exhaustion instead of obedience, and confusion instead of clarity. Control doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like inevitability, like the quiet message that nothing can really change. When people believe the future is already decided, they stop pushing back. They disengage, they retreat into private survival instead of collective action. That's how systems protect themselves. Not by crushing resistance outright, but by convincing people that resistance is pointless. Hopelessness is one of the most effective tools of control. It keeps people compliant without needing force, and it turns survival into a substitute for freedom. If the world feels like it's cracking, it's because the system is. And systems don't fail quietly. They strain, they harden, they demand more from people who already have less. This isn't about panic, it's about clarity. When you understand patterns, they lose some of their power over you. Fear works best in confusion. Clarity disrupts that. You're not imagining the pressure, you're responding to it. Awareness doesn't fix everything, but it does change how people move, connect, and resist. And resistance doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like refusing the stories you're being sold, like noticing who benefits from instability, like staying human in systems that profit from exhaustion. That's where change actually starts. Systems depend on people believing they are powerless, that nothing they do matters, that history is something that happens to them instead of something they shape. But every system that exists today was built by human choices, which means it can be changed by human choices too. Clarity creates connection. Connection creates solidarity, and solidarity is what every extractive system fears most. That's why staying awake matters. Not anxious, not panicked, just awake enough to see what's actually happening. Awareness doesn't mean having all the answers. It means refusing to sleepwalk through harm. It means paying attention to patterns instead of distractions. And choosing clarity even when it's uncomfortable. If this helped you see the system more clearly, share it. Stay curious, stay connected, and don't let exhaustion steal your voice.